And welcome to Straight Up. I am your host, Mark Carney. Thank you for tuning in. Well, you talk about avoiding the elephant in the room. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand failed to raise the issue of either trade or the strained relations with the United States when she had the chance in a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Canada hosted the G7 Foreign Affairs meeting this week in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and she says the critical subject just never came up.
One-on-one, face-to-face opportunity with an American counterpart, and you didn't take that chance to try to have a conversation about resuming trade talks when so much of the Canadian economy is relying on it.
I can confirm that I'm representing Canada's interests as the foreign minister, and I maintained Canadian interests and the Canadian position on a number of very serious issues that represent the interests of Canadians.
But none of those issues involved trade or our strained relations with the United States. The issue did come up on CBC's Power and Politics.
Marco Rubio was in Niagara-on-the-Lake today. Nobody's talking about the fact that we didn't push him on why we can't get back to the table on negotiating a deal with the United States. Minister Anand was asked about it, and she said, I didn't bring it up because it's somebody else's file. We should be talking about that. That's an important opportunity for us to try to get back to the table. And yet we're talking about Pierre Poilievre, and we're talking about announcements of lists of stuff that won't get filled for 15 years.
Okay, but on that, I mean, should the Foreign Affairs Minister be talking to the Secretary of State on trade when Ambassador Hillman's talking to Jameson Greer, Howard Lutnick, and Dom LeBlanc, Donald Trump, and Mark Carney are talking? Like, she'd get in trouble with this Prime Minister, wouldn't she? You know, and Rubio might too.
No. I would say if we take a Team Canada approach and if we encourage people to talk across the border to anybody they possibly can about the importance of the relationship, then you take every opportunity you possibly can to talk about the importance of the relationship. You don't say, I didn't bring it up at all.
One question remains, at least from my vantage point. Did the Prime Minister order his Foreign Affairs Minister to steer clear of the trade talk with Rubio, or was it simply her idea to avoid that sensitive topic? Jocelyn Bamford will be joining us a little later on to talk about that. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is mocking the legacy media's silence on the issue of internal squabbling over the federal budget in the Liberal caucus. As we reported on this show, a Liberal backbencher, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, has publicly attacked his own government's budget as falling short when it comes to climate investments.
Stalled climate action, cutting tree planting, moving away from an emissions gap, winding down greener homes. No new money for climate action. On housing, it falls short of these specific promises in our platform, and it unfortunately falls well short of the wartime effort that many of us thought we'd deliver. The budget adds $140 billion in new spending over 5 years, $90 billion net after savings, and only 36% of the net new spending is capital. My kids shouldn't pay for today's military or for me to save $400 of income taxes.
The media has largely ignored that controversy, preferring to focus their attention on Pierre Poilievre's leadership style and the recent floor crossing involving Chris d'Entremont. Here's Poilievre sarcastically addressing the media's lack of coverage on the grumbling in Carney's own caucus.
When you have a Liberal MP attacking the costly credit card budget that Mr. Carney has put forward, then we see turmoil in the Liberals, and I know that there will be wall-to-wall coverage on CTV of this turmoil, of a Liberal MP criticizing his own budget days before the vote. I know you're camped outside his office right now, waiting to get comment from him. I know you've been chasing Mark Carney down hallways to find out what he has to say. I mean, it's just been the relentless coverage that you will have of this dissent within the Liberal Party.
Yeah, there was none of that. Poilievre also pointed out the harsh criticism leveled against the Liberals by none other than Chris d'Entremont, who joined Carney's team a mere 6 months after the election. Well, public support for immigration may be falling in Canada, but one Liberal MP says it's time to grant federal aid and permanent residency to foreign students and migrant workers. As reported by Blacklock's reporter, MP Anand Sodhi, Brampton Centre, has sponsored a House of Commons petition calling on Canada to consider granting permanent residency to more than 3 million foreigners in Canada on valid or expired temporary permits. It states, Canada is home to hundreds of thousands of temporary residents, including international students, foreign workers, and people awaiting residency who have made real and economic contributions, real social and economic contributions, but now face deep uncertainty, declining mental health, and limited options to secure their status. A poll done by Nanos Research for the Globe and Mail found 3 out of 4 Canadians want cuts to immigration and a steep decline in the numbers who used to support immigration in Canada. And we are joined by Jocelyn Bamford, founder of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada, and a good friend of my radio show. Had her on many times and happy to chat with her once again. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Always a fun time.
So imagine, put yourself in the shoes of Anita Anand, our Foreign Affairs Minister. You're in the room with Marco Rubio. You've got all these outstanding issues that you can raise with him, but you don't. You talk about other stuff, other countries, other issues. What do you suppose she was thinking here when she just decided to avoid the elephant in the room?
Well, I'm thinking what I always thought. I don't think the Canadians want to deal with the United States, and they've demonstrated that with every activity and interaction that they do. They don't try to find common ground, which is typically what you do when you're negotiating or interacting with a different country. And they're so politically wed to their ideologies that they can't even see their way forward to try and find some common ground so we negotiate a deal. I mean, clearly, a financial deal with the US is not top of mind to them, although it's top of mind for probably every Canadian manufacturer that you encounter here in Canada. And it's inexplicable. So the only rationale I could possibly think of is they don't want a trade deal with the United States because if they do, who are they going to run against? And they've already signaled that they want closer ties to communist China. And I think they're doing everything to support that that's the way that they're going.
Yeah, and you believe, if I'm correct, that they're sabotaging their own trade talks because they're looking for any pretext, any excuse they can to cozy up to communist China. Is that right?
Well, what other conclusion could we possibly come to? It's again inexplicable that they haven't got a deal with our largest customer, our closest ally and neighbor. So I can't imagine that that wouldn't be top priority to them. Again, if you were a business person and you had one customer that had 76% of your business and that customer wasn't too pleased with you, what would be the first thing you would do? You would sit down with that customer and try and figure out how you make them happy and come up with a deal. But we're not seeing any movement to that. And I think a deal also takes off the table if there is an election coming up from the result of the budget not passing. Again, they're going to want to use the same strategy, which is running against Trump. So if they have a trade deal, that's not going to be a vehicle that's available to them. So, I can't figure out any other rationale for this. It just makes literally no sense to me.
Like, we are literally nowhere right now in terms of trade talks. They're not going on. I mean, you would think that if you have a guy like Rubio in the room with you, that, he put the bug in his ear, we'd really like to get back to discussions. Marco Rubio was very much involved in the trade talks. So it's not like he was, that's not his file. And yet somehow in her mind, well, I can't raise this issue with him. It doesn't make any sense. You have access to this guy, take advantage of it, for crying out loud. I don't think he would hold it against you, to be honest with you. I think, he would talk to you about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we are unarmed going down to deal with the United States. I don't think we have the right people in the right positions that can negotiate a deal. I think you take a business person and you take somebody that's ideologically aligned with the United States negotiating team, and that's how you get a deal. And that's what, again, we've talked about this in the past. The former Prime Minister Harper tapped Gary Doer, who was an NDP former premier to go and negotiate a deal with the United States. And that's how we got an exemption for Canada. It was a brilliant strategy. And we should be utilizing the same strategy to get a deal with the United States.
Where are you on the budget? I mean, I know you're not a big fan of this budget. I don't know too many people who are. But politically speaking, we spoke about it a little bit earlier. Do you think it's possible that it won't pass? That in fact, this would be a confidence motion that fails and we end up back in another election?
Yeah, I'm not thinking that that's a huge possibility. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, but I don't think that the Conservative Party is particularly well organized enough to go into another election. There's still the leadership review that has to happen. And I think that the polls are too close for the Liberals to want to go to another election. So, but who knows? You never know what's going to happen in the 13th hour, and it's always a possibility. But certainly, my concern is the Liberals' focus instead of coming to some joint policy agreement. Their strategy is just to try and get enough people and the Conservative Party to cross the floor so that they don't have to go to an election or go to the Canadian public to ask them their opinion. So it seems to me that there's a lot of underhanded tactics going on as they continue, I'm sure, to try and recruit people to cross the floor so they get their majority one way or the other.
Yeah, meantime, you have the media beating the drum that everybody hates Pierre Poilievre and that the Tory caucus is a cesspool, of rage and grumbling. And that's why it was kind of amusing to hear Pierre Poilievre kind of throw it back in the face of the media and mock them over their silence on the fact that Nate Erskine-Smith, the Liberal MP, has come out publicly and blasted the budget on a number of different fronts. And yet, is that story being covered? You'd think that would be even more important because it's the government caucus that is apparently fractured over the lack of money, going into these green initiatives with other people like Stephen Guilbeault allegedly not happy and Wilkinson not happy. What did you make of that when Pierre Poilievre talked to the media about that issue?
Yeah, it is just astonishing the way that the media has lost their way. And I'm talking about the mainstream media. Thank goodness for independent media who provides another viewpoint on issues that are coming forward. But it seems absolutely insane the way that the mainstream media just becomes the PR arm of the Liberal Party. And in talking to a CBC reporter before the last election, he wanted to do a story on the impact on small to medium sized business in this country. And I had said to him, I didn't think his political overlords would ever let the story see the light of day. And of course, they didn't. And I said to him, when you were in journalism school at Carleton, did you think you were going to be telling the big stories that Canadian and people needed to know and exposing corruption and fraud? Or did you think you were just going to be a public affairs arm of the Liberal government? And, we need to call them out. We need to call them out because they clearly have no shame. But that's what happens when you fund organizations. You fund organizations and they become beholden to you. And that is why many business associations in Canada have lost the voice of business and have just become the cheerleaders for the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party writes a bunch of checks to a bunch of different business associations. And in exchange for that, they get support. So if you're belonging to a business association and you're paying your hard-earned money, you should be asking, one, do they take money from government? And two, how much of the money that you write them a check goes to their bureaucracy, as opposed to getting the issues out in front of politicians that need to be exposed so that we can grow business prosperity and jobs in Canada? That's a question that you should ask every business association. And if they're taking money from government, I'm going to tell you they're probably siding more with the government than they are with issues that are important to your business.
Yeah, and consider Poilievre's election campaign and promises, vowing to cut $10 billion from the amount of money that the government spends on consultants. I think we're up to $25 billion, just an astonishing amount of money going out to consultants, especially when you've hired, so many civil servants, to blow up the ranks of the public service in Canada, people that we probably didn't need. And so, you have to ask yourself, if the media has to choose, it's an easy choice for them to make if they're looking for self-interest, right? Because you've got Poilievre saying he's going to cut media subsidies, cut all this money going out to the consultants, defund the CBC, and counter that with the government side, with the Liberals saying, oh, we're going to give you more money, So, these reporters, they're looking at the two sides and going, well, I know which way, I know where my bread is buttered.
And it's the same with the NGOs, the non-government organizations that take tens of thousands of taxpayers' dollars, millions of taxpayers' dollars, and what do the Canadians get in exchange for that? And we've seen situations where NGOs fund charities and they turn around and fund other charities. I mean, you could find this all out in about 10 minutes on Google by finding all of the charities that donate to other charities. And why would a charity need to donate to another charity? They should be focused on their purpose and not become, pseudo money laundering organizations, and doing it with our tax dollars. If a charity is worthy, people will write checks from their own pockets, and the amount of voice fraud and abuse happening throughout these organizations, and the fact that, again, you would think someone in the media would want to investigate all of this, but they don't. They're not interested in it. So what we see is our taxpayers' dollars time and time again wasted and funneled into areas that weren't originally intended to. And we have to take a look at that, because that is just absolutely unacceptable when Canadians are struggling to pay for gas and groceries and take care of their families.
Yeah, let's get back to Erskine-Smith for a minute. He's expressed reservations. He's attacked Carney from the left, which I think benefits Carney because he can try to look like the reasonable one, and pretend like, oh, well, don't worry. I'm not like those crazies. I can keep a leash. I could put a leash on some of these radical left, environmental nut jobs at caucus, the Stephen Guilbeaults of the world and the Erskine-Smiths of the world. He can then position himself as appearing to be the moderate. So in that respect, maybe all this is smoke and mirrors. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the current Liberal government's forthright in what their plans are. Why do you have to have these special programs that get special approval? Why wouldn't you just unleash free enterprise and manufacturing and businesses to go create by having across the board an easier red tape and regulations to get projects moving? If you really wanted to ignite the economy in Canada, you would cut the red tape on everybody, not just on the few hand-picked projects that you've decided are a national interest. There's so much that the Liberal government has in their toolkit right now to unleash prosperity and manufacturing. They could eliminate industrial carbon tax. They could get pipeline projects through. They could reduce the red tape and the time it takes to get a project through. They could benchmark what they have in the United States in terms of all of these metrics, and they don't bother to do that. I mean, I could loan them an analysis from Queen's University when we were looking at either growing in Ontario or growing in the United States. Queen's told us to grow in the United States. So they went through all the metrics, from all the way from safety and security, crime statistics, healthcare, education, the cost of energy, red tape. They went through entire metrics, and sitting right here and on my bookshelf in my plant in Toronto, I'm happy to share that with them, but they don't seem to want to read through or understand that. And so there's a lot they could do on their own. Tariffs set aside to ignite the economy of Canada, but they don't seem very much interested in doing that. They just want to pick their friends, their hand-picked winners and their losers on their own, because they believe that they're best have the knowledge on how to direct the economy, how to direct Canadians on how to live, what to think, where they get their education. They want to control everything. And it's time Canadians recognize that and ask themselves if they want to have their own liberty or if they want to have a politician in Ottawa. Some are not very qualified to tell us how to live our lives.
Yeah. When they pick winners, everybody else is the loser. I think that's how that works out. When they go with corporate welfare, throwing massive amounts of money at subsidizing companies that don't even need it, giant corporations. And then when the money, fritters away or things change, they're the first ones out the door. It's just sad. We see it time and time again. And these guys never learn. They never learn. You've seen it. Last word to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. We need to make sure that we are in charge of the economy. We can drive prosperity better, especially people that have been doing it for years. If you took a group of business owners in the manufacturing space and said, hey, what do we need to do to ignite the economy? You would have 10 things that they could do immediately that would have measurable outputs, but they don't want to do that. I don't know the last time they consulted with a small to medium-sized industry. And remember, 92% of all Canadians work for companies 100 people and below. So, our door is always open. We're happy to give advice to ensure that the Canadian economy grows, but they never reach out to talk to us. And by the way, we would do that for free. We're not going to charge them a big, huge consulting fee. If they want to find out how to ignite the economy, we'll give them our ideas and we'll work with them, but we never get the chance.
No, they don't want to know what you have to say, because they probably know that it'll run counter anything that they want to do. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jocelyn. Great.
My pleasure, Mark.
Jocelyn Bamford. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again soon, shall we? We'll see you next time.